Hey, good day, everyone. Hey, I just pray that this devotion would be meaningful to you, that God will just minister to your heart today. And then as His word goes forth, that it would do just like He said, it would produce the fruit that He desires. And may it produce in your life, in my life, just fruit of joy, of peace, of just of faithfulness. And may it just increase in above and beyond measures. Hey, well, today is the day of the Passion Week where the tomb is sealed and the guard is placed in front of the tomb. Matthew 27 records the event for us. You find it here. And it says this, Matthew 27, verse 62. On the next day, which followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, "Sir, we remember that while he was alive, how that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore command the tomb be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away and say that the people that he's risen from the dead, and so that last deception will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard. Go your way. Make it as secure as you know how." And so they went and they made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard. That's Saturday, right? And in some respects, Saturday would be the hardest day of all for the disciples. I mean, Thursday and Friday, no doubt, were the worst days that they've ever experienced in their lives. But Saturday would be the day that the events of the last 2 days started to settle in. They began to process what just happened. This would be the day when all the trauma that they just experienced over the last days it was no longer just mechanical movements, that our bodies are going through just to survive. Now the waves of reality start to crash over them one after another. And they start to realize, like, this wasn't just a bad dream. This wasn't just a fantasy that happened, but this is a reality. And that would be their Saturday. The arrest of Jesus and the disciples abandoning them. That was all crises. And that was crises that they had to process, right? But when they were going through it, well, it was just, I mean, it was just something that they had to go through, right? There was a trauma that they were experiencing. Our rabbi, the one we knew as Messiah, is being taken away. All our hopes, all our dreams, all that we planned for our lives. It all moved. It all revolved around him, and in a split moment. There's this mob, this chaos, these soldiers that came. They invaded our garden where we were, and the disciples did what they could do, right? They ran because the fight had been taken away from them. Jesus took it away. He made it clear. Peter cut off the high priest's servant's ear. And he was rebuked by Jesus. He said, "Put away your sword, put it back into its sheath. Shall I not drink of the cup of suffering the Father has given me?" So what else do you do in a crisis, in a trauma situation like that? But you go through the primal motions of survival. Everyone for themselves, right? Flight mode. But with the flight also went all that they hoped for, all that they believed. And then some of them saw Jesus go through part of the trials. The next major blow was that he was being tried before the Roman ruler, the Roman ruler of the district, Pilate. And there was a move that they weren't ready for. I mean, it's one thing for the religious rulers to want to kill Jesus. I mean, that was something that they lived with, right? That was like one of the stressors they kind of lived in most of the ministry there, at least for the last year. But the religious rulers didn't have the power to kill Jesus. They had that removed from them by the Romans. But now they had formed this scheme with Pilate, with the Romans, and now they're in cahoots together, and they're hearing of the trials, they're hearing of the mockings of Jesus, they're hearing of the flogging. They would hear of the sentence of crucifixion, blow by blow. They would hear of these things, and like Pilate, thinks that he's in control of Jesus' destiny. And you read about him, a little control freak there, and he's saying to Jesus, don't you realize I have the power, to spare your life or to take it? Like, I'm in control. I'm the one who controls the events of the day. He said, don't you realize I have the power to release you or to crucify you? And Jesus said that great thing back to him. He said, "You have no power over me unless it's been given to you from above. So the one who handed me over to you has the greater sin." And then, like, even Pilate's false sense of control and power was taken from him as the crowds began to shout, crucify him, crucify him. And to a control person, like, well, then they turn into that mode of, I just need to maintain control. And that's more important than justice. Like, when it comes down to it, for a control person, it's protect self and maintain control. And of course, the situation spirals out of control quickly, at least in most people's eyes. Jesus would be flogged by these cruel, war-hardened Romans, and then he would be crucified. The disciples would all be in shock, like, how could these things even be? How could God allow such a thing to happen? And that would be Friday. But Saturday's sun would come up. And with that, the nightmare wouldn't go away. It would come, they would have to realize, like, this was the reality. Like, he was dead. He was put in a tomb. A large stone was rolled in front of that tomb. A guard is now in place. Saturday would be the hardest of days. I mean, and for us, you know, or for other people, a Saturday could be one day long, or it could be weeks, or it could be months, or it could even be years. Saturdays are the day between the promise and the fulfillment of the promises. Saturdays are the times where it seems like all hopes are smashed to the ground, and then the promises are sealed behind a large stone. Saturdays are the days where a person's reeling, where they go, I thought I heard God so clear. I thought his promises were absolutely sure. I thought everything was moving in the right direction, to only see everything fall apart and everything die. These are the days, Saturdays are the day of faith being proved, of tested. They are the days where it requires a raw and a stubborn trust. These are the days where you are on a roller coaster of faith, right? You have this faith, and then it crashes down into unbelief, and then it rises up in faith. And they can be moments apart, but these are the days where clinging to Jesus is needed like never before. Abraham had his Saturday. Abraham had these promises from God, like, your descendants are going to be more numerous than the stars in the sky. You're going to be a blessing to all nations. And yet he had no descendant, and it stayed like that. The promise of the son, right? It stayed like that for 15, 20 years was his Saturday. But then came the promise. Joseph had his Saturday. You read about him at the end of Genesis. He's given these dreams by God, dreams of like some kind of leadership role. He knows that, to only find himself an object of his brother's jealousy, and then sold as a slave to Egypt. And his Saturday was years and years long. But then the promise came. Moses had his Saturday, called to be a deliverer of Egypt, and he messes up, murders an Egyptian, and ends up fleeing into the desert. His Saturday was 40 years long. Then the promise came. And then we could go on and on. David, the great King David, anointed as king of Israel. But the time between his anointing and him coming into power, that Saturday, many years of hardship, of loss, of being spoken evil of. But those were also those many years of Psalms, those Psalms that are written for you and me, that we take comfort in. Look, Saturdays might be long. They might be relentless. They might be trying and weary. They might be taking you to the end of what you thought was the end of your rope, to only find there was more of an end to that rope. Or where you thought it was the absolute bottom and you couldn't go any lower, to find it goes absolutely lower. Read the Psalms. Read the Psalms. The Psalms are so often, so many of them are the in-between times, the Saturday. And so many of the Psalms, they start out with like a praise of who God is, and then it tells of the present situation. Long present situations, followed by praise of God. I know you're good, and I know you're going to come through. Saturdays. This Saturday of the Passion Week, they thought, well, the Romans thought they sealed behind the tomb all the disciples' hope, all their dreams, all they knew what was true. Jesus is dead. We sealed them in. That's what they thought they did. But Sunday comes and Sunday changes everything. Sunday proves Saturday was necessary. Sunday breathes life in a far greater way than it ever did before. Sunday brings salvation from the midst of damnation. Sunday brings redemption from the midst of rejection. Sunday brings presence in the midst of isolation. Sunday brings eternal life in the place of living futility, right? Sunday comes, and the tomb and the events of yesterday, well, in the light of Sunday, Saturday all starts to make sense. But most of all, Jesus is in Sunday. And because he rose from the dead, Sunday is secure. And Sunday will be beyond what we could ever experience or think or imagine in a Saturday, right? But you know what? Even greater than that, from Jesus rising from the dead, it tells us a greater Sunday yet is coming. And that Sunday is going to be beyond what we could ever experience on this earth right now. I mean, it's going to be good and real good. The real Sunday's coming. Hang in there and hope. Hang in there and persevere. Hang in there, cling to Jesus, and know that our God is the God of resurrection. He is the God who makes all things new. God bless you guys. I'll see you tomorrow.